Okay, thank you all for joining us for our fourth webinar of 2020. Certainly an interesting time, and just to put everyone's mind at ease, all the panelists are practicing their social distancing and we are nowhere near each other. One in Texas, one in New York, one up north of the border. So we're certainly far enough apart. We appreciate you guys taking some time out to join us, and we hope you find this a worthwhile presentation. As always, we're excited to be bringing the MSP-Ignite Resource Network webinar series to members and invited guests. All of the presenters speaking in this series throughout the year have made a commitment to provide our membership with actionable insight into areas that can help them grow or otherwise impact their bottom line in a positive way. While webinars like this are the start, they will also be providing more granular content when they visit each of your peer groups. Before I introduce our speakers, I should go ahead and answer the most popular question we receive during every one of these webinars. Yes, we are recording this session. We will send you an email after the session's over. We'll give you all the slides, so don't worry about catching any of the information. We'll make sure we send it all to you. And we will give you a link to the MSP-Ignite YouTube channel once the presentation has been uploaded. Everyone is muted on this call except for the presenters, but there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to use it. And when our main presenter is speaking, he has actually asked for questions during his presentation. So don't hesitate. If he says something provocative that you want to talk about or something confusing that you want to ask about, feel free to post a question and I will answer it and reach out and ask him as well. Our keynote speaker today is Alan Edwards. Alan's the president of Eureka Process. He's been involved in the industry since 1994. He worked his way up as from an entry-level tech position to a division manager before founding his first IT company in 2002. Over the next 10 years, he led the enterprise from break-fix to MSP, from a custom ticketing system to working with both Autotask and ConnectWise at different times. Alan is a sought-after MSP expert who helps owners and their teams optimize their service delivery processes while building meaningful, growth-centered relationships that support next-level performance. Whether he's working with an MSP, scuba diving, skiing, traveling around the world, or relaxing with acro yoga, Alan does so with a great deal of passion. Of course, webinars like this do not take place without the assistance of our valued partners and sponsors. Today, we have the pleasure of being sponsored by Rocket Cyber, and we're fortunate to have president and co-founder of Rocket Cyber, Billy Austin, with us. Good afternoon, Billy.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me on the webinar today. Today, we're presenting our SOC as a service. For those of you that are not familiar with the acronym SOC, that stands for Security Operations Center, which is all based on the premise of continuously monitoring to be able to identify threat actors and indicators, specifically for the small medium business infrastructure, if you will. Just to set the presence, a little bit about our backgrounds. This is my partner, Carl Banzoff. We've been together for almost 2.5 decades now. We've been developing security products, originally with Citadel Security, that was primarily focused on vulnerability remediation for the Department of Defense and intelligence community, which later on became McAfee. We rejoined in 2012 to develop a data breach risk intelligence solution, primarily for the HIPAA and PCI communities, which is now from SolarWinds, which we got exposed and learned quite a bit about the MSP community in and of itself. So we look to take our enterprise and government and security backgrounds and really wanted to focus in on a specific opportunity. When we decided to start Rocket Cyber, one thing that we did is perform a lot of investigation. And one thing that we found is just an overwhelming volume of small business were continuously being breached, intrusions, regardless of the numbers that you see from the various media outlets, if you will. You know, we've always said it's not about the percentage. It's the real question is who hasn't been breached. And, you know, when we step back for a second is anytime you see an epidemic, there's always an opportunity. And we looked at the MSP as a channel to exploit this opportunity and take advantage of this whole dilemma on the daunting volume of intrusions. And when you look at these 5 bullets here, they were really kind of what evolved into our reason for why we decided to start Rocket Cyber and eventually evolve into a full-blown SOC as a service company. You know, historically, these small business owners were convinced that firewalls and AVs were good enough. A lot of the times the perception is evading these defenses are how the bad guys gain access to the network, which in fact is partially a true statement. But I would also like to shed light that we have what's called the threat gap. And the threat gap is really what's unknown, where we have no visibility or no insight. And I'll shed light on that here in a moment. The deciding factor is what we call the dwell time. And the dwell time is when an attacker gains access to a network, but they go unnoticed for a long period of time. You know, I think most of us have read the news on Home Depots and Targets. And, you know, in fact, if you take a look at, let's say Marriott, for an example, you know, most of those dwell times were like 3 and 4 years. Just think about that for a second. You have attackers inside your network for 4 years and you don't know about it. What could they possibly be doing? And if you think about it, they're really setting up a coin-operated business to be able to establish a foothold inside that infrastructure, create persistence on some type of, you know, computing device to be able to exfiltrate and proliferate something of monetary value, which in most cases are personal identifiable data or intellectual property. What I'm trying to depict here in the graph of green to red is the longer this dwell time remains an issue is the greater the financial impact. So one of our objectives with the SOC as a service is when the inevitable does occur, and I'm referring to an intrusion, how can we bring that 206 days down to months, weeks, days, hours, and minutes, and eventually seconds, so we can be able to respond and deter those attackers. So to be able to set the premise of, you know, some of the presentation content here is I want to talk about threat indicators. And one of the reasons that we expose our backgrounds and our development experience on, you know, a variety of different security products over the tenure of our careers is not just our backgrounds, but many security vendors. When you look at this radar, let's focus at the very bottom. Let's start with hash values and IP addresses and domain names, those bottom 3. Almost every MSP provides some type of prevention, detection, blocking capability to be able to detect bad hashes or IP addresses or domain names. And those have really become, you know, kind of what I call commoditized. I mean, it's almost a core necessity to be able to have that capability. But as we move across the radar, things get a little bit tougher. And so when you look at this fourth bullet, it's called Endpoint Network and Cloud Artifacts. You know, I would say over the past couple of years, you know, many small businesses, they begin migrating to what we call next gen, you know, malware prevention, which is going to give you that endpoint artifact telemetry. But the real question is, are we monitoring those endpoint, you know, the way we should be? Are we monitoring for any type of defense evasion or antivirus evasion? Are we also monitoring the network telemetry or the cloud artifacts? And I've got a few examples to be able to see if you can answer yes to those. Tools, this has been a real challenge for all security vendors. And I think we're all familiar with things like password crackers and things like Mimikatz. You know, historically, vendors created a static signature that said, this is Mimikatz.executable. We detect it and we said there's a presence. The problem is the bad guys are now have access to the source code. They compile it, create their own nomenclature for it. So it's a cat and mouse game with all the vendors. So therefore, it has become very hard for security vendors to be able to tackle the tool approach. The hardest thing for security vendors, and the majority of most vendors do not provide what we call Ttp detection. This stands for tactics, techniques, and procedures. And just to shed you a little light here, tactics stands for the first T. Think about that is the goal of the attacker. So if I'm a bad guy and I want to gain access to the network, I want to be able to gain initial access. I want to establish persistence on that box. And I perhaps want to establish a command and control server so I can exfiltrate data. Those would be sample tactics. Those would be the little bullets that I've listed here on the right. The technique would be the actual technical operation that I'm going to perform in order to obtain any of those tactical goals. So for those of you that are ex-military, we use this phrase TTPs, you know, in the world of warfare, if you will. So it's a somewhat very common strategy. To be able to put this into perspective, throughout our daily lives here at Rocket Cyber SOC, once again, the Security Operations Center, we observe countless intrusions and compromises throughout the day. And what I'm trying to depict here in solid green are two examples of what we call endpoint indicators, endpoint threat indicators. In this case, had exactly evaded what we call next-gen malware prevention. You've seen, you know, we're showing a VB script that would eventually call a PowerShell script, a web.ini file that contained a list of command and control servers. That's what the C2 stands for. And what we found that was very interesting is that web.ini file would simply make callbacks and continuously update new command and control list. The second thing is it would use what we call LOL binaries, or living off the LAN. Those are utilities that are already present in the native operating system. One of those is what's called bits. So, you know, it's things that are already existing. It's not just predominant to Windows. It could be existing in Mac or Windows. But nevertheless, these are just two examples of a long multi-stage attack campaign that we've seen. And what we found is we identified this bad stuff, but we didn't have visibility that said, how did it start? So what we decided to do is, why don't we expand our telemetry to start monitoring all the potential attack vectors besides, you know, beyond and above the endpoint. So we said, well, the majority of this stuff happens by email. So why don't we begin with Office 365, given that all the small businesses are very heavily favored, you know, with that email system. And when you look at what we call initial access, now keep in mind this initial access is one of those tactical goals of the TTPs we were talking about. One example that we see very common is what we call stolen credentials. Another example here could be what we call brute force into the Office 365 account for those accounts that may not have multi-factor authentication enabled. Stolen credentials are popular from those Marriotts and Home Depots, those very widely data breaches where all that data resides on the dark net. The bad guys buy it, you know, get a copy of it, and they start authenticating into all these customer environments. And to be honest with you, once they get access to the Office 365, the game's pretty much over, because they're going to move to stage 2, which is what we call lateral movement. Most of us are familiar with the concept of spear phishing, but there's a specific attack ID called internal spear phishing. And it's going to be very likely high probability of success, because now I'm a trusted user. You're going to be able to open up that spreadsheet from that trusted user. That's going to eventually evolve into downloading scripts, or if you've got an Excel file with macros enabled, there's so many trillions of examples. But from a high level, you're looking at cloud telemetry in the gray bars, endpoint telemetry on the green. And then what we found is the majority of the default firewalls are not blocking or have any type of rule to detect the exfiltration of data leveraging the BITS protocol. And so therefore we said, you know what, we have to be able to create a cybersecurity practice that is monitoring for all these moving parts, not just the endpoint, but being able to bring in that cloud and network telemetry to be able to put together the storyboard on how this originated and be able to stop it before it gets to that exfiltration stage. At the end of the day, almost each and every one of these attacks that we observe throughout the day, I always say it's inevitable. I'm not saying it's okay, there's an intrusion taking place, but think about it like this. Every attack has multiple stages, and we're giving the MSP or the SOC operator the capability to detect one of those stages at an earlier cycle before it gets way down in the dwell time, like 6 months, for an example. So that way you can be able to deter, detect, and take action before the attacker accomplishes their goal, which is, we all know, is typically to be able to steal something of monetary value. Just to paint the picture, when we look at cloud telemetry, for an example, so I'm in Dallas, Texas. I see a normal successful authentication at the very bottom. However, I start seeing a failed brute force activity from Brazil, which maybe not too concerning, but if I see it, 50 different times within 60 minutes, probably want to take action, as I know that somebody is definitely trying to beat away at my Office 365 account. And then something else more alarming is, given the fact I'm at Dallas on the same timestamp, I also see somebody else successfully authenticated in Russia to my account. And the problem that I'm trying to illuminate here is, most of us as MSPs or SOC operators, are we visualizing how this stuff is originating? And what we're finding and observing throughout the throughout a number of incidents, is it's occurring through Office 365. It's not to state that all of them, but it's definitely a majority of them. As we move forward past the cloud telemetry, let's bring in the network and the endpoint together. In many cases, I talk to MSPs throughout the day. They say, Billy, we don't permit RDP connections for our customer networks. And I hear that quite often. And I will tell you that if the user has the capability to download software, then it's very probable that an RDP connection could be spun up. We see users that download software that will open up an RDP connection without any type of intelligence or insight to the MSP until they happen to be monitoring for it. When you start looking into the details and you tie that network to the host, we can see that somebody is now running a curl script from the command line that's communicating to command and control servers. And there's so many different examples. I'm just given the time a lot just to provide a few eye candy. Summing this thing back up, I wanted to look at the evolution of the MSP space and understanding and speaking with probably 50 some odd MSPs at the start of the gate. Hey, we started with break fix, we moved into basic AV, started getting into firewalls, and the evolution of MSPs has really become almost as a MSSP if you look at the classification of what Gartner and Forrester and most of those industry analysts. And so today it's all about how can Rocket Cyber, and us as a company in conjunction with the MSP be able to come together to deliver that, 7x24 SOC service to be able to tackle on those 31 million small business organizations that need this continuous monitoring service. And with that said, that's what really led us to the development of what we call a threat monitoring platform. That is, it's multi-tenancy, integrates with, RMM and PSA tools, really developed it specifically for the MSP industry. It's very unique because we've also developed a series of what we call purpose-built threat detection apps. And we include that in our own app store so we can be able to identify suspicious and malicious activity. And we said, you know what, if we're going to hone in and focus on the small business market, we really have to, be very cost sensitive, because we know that the MSP space has to make a profit, and eventually the SMB owner has to be able to absorb the cost. So there's really two different models. We have a software component that, you can come in and get everything at $1. But the real question is, do you have the security talent in order to be able to monitor and act upon those threats? And if not, we've decided to create a full-blown managed SOC that basically is, where we're an extension to your team. You can leverage our backgrounds and experience to be able to triage those events and to be able to automate those threats into your PSA ticketing system. From a high level, I sure appreciate your time today. This is going to conclude the talk from Rocket Cyber. Thank you.
Project process for profit, performance, and predictability. I specifically selected this title so I could test the P's in my microphone. I like to be funny, so bear with me. All right, so the goal for project process is we want to make everyone happy. Not just happy, but ecstatic, profitable, all those good things. It's not just about techs. It's not just about clients. The entire team's involved. We're going to see some pieces from finance to making owners happy, even the engineers involved. I do hate talking about myself, but I have been told not to skip this slide. You guys want to know who you're talking to or why. As Steve said, I've been in the IT since '94. He covered most of these things. We founded Eureka Process in 2017. This is the type of stuff we've been doing for the last 3 years with IT services firms. So we're living in there, breathing and seeing the continuous new challenges that are coming up for MSPs, and we keep finding ways to make that more processed and more predictable. So let's get into the basics. Why do we need to manage projects? Is it not just complicating things? Because I get that question a lot. Why make it more complicated? So let me share with you what I feel is a current workflow for projects. See if this looks familiar to you. Somebody makes an agreement to sell a project. They don't quite have all the pieces, but heck, they're the owner, they can make it happen. They come back to the office, hey guys, we got work, go get the work done. Everybody happily jumps into projects because we know that technicians love projects. We get to work, we're making some progress, we run into a couple of roadblocks, some questions, maybe we get a little confused what's happening. Next thing you know, management or clients and other stakeholders, they find that not everything is getting done, there's some frustration. Meanwhile, our calendar is filling up because we're repeating this cycle over and over again. We accept new projects, we get started, we don't quite know how to finish the project, and the calendar becomes more and more unmanageable. Projects become less and less profitable. This is a common cycle that I've seen. So as with almost everything I do, my staff will probably roll their eyes. We should have a process for that. Is it in writing? So let me share with you some ideas, tips, and tricks for how to get a process wrapped around your projects. First of all, and I find myself saying this for almost every process concept I talk about, is that we like to focus on execution and manage because we are a service delivery company. But I typically believe that the key to projects is actually in the quoting and scoping phase, and even then it starts before the sale. And then, of course, there's some great continuous improvement we can do with a great project closing. So let's dive straight into, all right, what is this fancy quoting scoping process you have going on? The first thing I like to do is define, all right, if we're going to begin this, what exactly do we call a project? And there's some things here that everybody agrees with, and that's okay. But I want to show you what we recommend. First of all, create a strict definition. If there's any doubt, if you anticipate whatever work you're doing is going to take more than X hours, let's call it a project. A common number I see here for our clients is 6 or 8 hours. And I will actually, you'll find several recommendations in here where you begin to want more things to become projects as your project process becomes more predictable. You like how this works better than service tickets sometimes. A second criteria which might make it a project is this item new hardware? Yes, that's right, folks. A single PC could be a viable project. That means it might be a very short project. It could even be a 2 or 3 ticket project, but those types of things usually involve my third criteria, which is the services that coordinate multiple resources. I don't mean, hey, I need 2 people on site for 4 hours unboxing stuff. I mean more of a resource handoff or even a predecessor-successor relationship of tickets. Using PCs as an example, frequently there is a generic prep of the PC, followed by a client-specific prep for a PC, followed by the installation of those. Those might be 3 different resources, 3 different talents, and they're definitely each dependent on the previous one being fixed. That could be a great, simple project to manage and deliver right the first time. One thing I want to stop and say is I do trust Steve as a great facilitator, and I much prefer answering questions over presenting content. So if you do have a question, throw it in the Q&A box, and Steve will do the proper interruptions to make that happen. I'm not offended in the least, and I prefer it. So let's dive into project scoping. When we sell a project, like that animation that I showed you with the missing pieces, we've got to get the big picture. Frequently, we rely on the service team to figure stuff out. Like, hey, you need to quote a server. How long does it take to replace a server? 40 hours. Great, we got it. But there's so many other details, including solving business needs. And using server replacement as example, in today's market, is it time to go to the cloud? Can you go to the cloud? Do the apps work in the cloud? What are the other business needs that might mean you need premise? What if some servers on the host need to be premise versus cloud? It's more than just a replace and a rip out and replace. So you have to get the sales team involved or your account management team. Maybe this is the owner. And we got to understand the client climate. What technology do they currently have? What are the actual business goals we're trying to achieve? Heck, I mean, a lot of our sales team, account management owners are a bit technical. So we even know some of the gotchas to look for. Like, hey, we need to check to make sure Sage is compatible with this new version. Those types of things, if we know of any possible red spots, we should point them out. And again, frequently our technical sales team knows a little bit about what they're proposing. Hey, replacing the server is the right thing to do for these business needs. Great, let us know that. What hardware do you think we need? Software that we think we need? Services recurring. But here's the fun part. We're gathering this information and we're gonna package it and deliver it to our service team. And our service team is then gonna take that information, propose what you're probably used to, proposing a hardware software solution. What services do they need? Is this a time to input managed services or disaster recovery as far as other recurring processes? And then the part you guys are probably all used to, which is, all right, how long is this gonna take? And I'm gonna show you more details on how to get that information in just the next slide. And then since sales had to do all this work, which might be new to you, to communicate to the service team what we're trying to accomplish, the techs need to do the exact same thing, which is they need to deliver benefits and alternatives back to the sales team, not just, here's what we're gonna do. If, for example, it's a cloud migration, we need to help the sales team understand the benefits of the cloud migration. And if there is an alternative to go premise-based, we need to arm them with that information. Like, hey, we could go premise, but it was gonna cost tens of thousands of more dollars, and it's gonna cost more in maintenance, and so we don't see a good reason to. Give them that information to make the proper sale. And then we develop, again, the part you probably love, the scope of work. This is a spreadsheet we have on our website. I call it P04.1 because I number everything. That's how I work. a couple of things I want to point out. First of all, this spreadsheet has several tabs. The first set of tabs are the room for the salesperson to fill out those first questions I showed you. The last set of tabs is for the service department to fill out those questions I showed you in the previous slide. And the middle tab is this scope of work.
Hey, Alan.
If you think, yes.
Sorry, I wanted to jump in with something here. You've mentioned the salesperson a few times, and I have the benefit of looking at the attendee list, and I probably know about 2/3 of the people on here. And I know that the salesperson in many smaller MSPs is often the person that will buck the system the most.
The owner.
That person usually also has the title of owner.
Yeah.
And they're also the account manager. And when you look at the project process, I find that that's where the problem is, right? It's how do we hold our salesperson, who also is the owner, accountable for following the initial process here?
Excellent question. So let me address that, because I've had to give this advice before. When the rest of the team usually comes to me and says, hey, we're frustrated, we have this great process in place, the owner won't follow it. The owner is skipping steps. My answer to the technical team, the other people involved in this process, is one, whenever they give you the right stuff, always give them the right results, because here's why. I call it the, I'm making this up as I go, I call it the black box principle. If an owner can put information into the black box of your project process, and they get the results out that they want every time, that's positive reinforcement. If they do the process incorrectly and it causes problems and negative consequences, that's negative reinforcement. And it's not an overnight thing, but that's typically how I approach it. I'll add one more piece. I'm very block oriented. I believe firmly in wearing multiple hats, and I don't mean doing everything at once. I mean literally taking the time to switch hats. When this process is well thought through, my hope and goal, and I hope the audience can agree too, is that the owner says, okay, so you're telling me if I do this work in this way and I deliver it to my team, and my team can give me a consistently positive result, then that's worth it to me. But the last half of that equation is a must. And I don't believe that owners have that level of trust until I've seen it work a few times. So on my second to last slide, I believe it is, somewhere around there, I will talk about how to get started down that process road. Hope that helps, Steve, and whoever may have asked that question as well.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
So this is practically changing course directly from that statement, because it seems like a lot of work. But at a glance, this spreadsheet may look complicated. I'm going to try to summarize it and show you just a few things you might not be thinking of in whatever process you have now. As you can see, it's labeled in phases and tasks. Those translate exactly into auto task or phases and project tickets if you're in ConnectWise Manage. I'm going to call attention to the first phase, pre-project effort. Technicians work with tickets typically. I would give them a scoping ticket for their helping the salesperson scope. Hopefully you're doing it before the sale. You might be doing it after the sale. We'll talk about that later. But that ticket can be put into your project so that you're actually billing the project for the time you spent with this effort. So you might as well go ahead and quote for it as well and recoup some of that cost. Same for project management. There's some stuff later on in the slideshow, some activities you're going to do to manage the project. You might as well anticipate that, even if it's a guess, and get compensated for some of those efforts. The other phases you see in your screen are just logical separations. And I think the biggest discussion point here is, all right, what makes up a new task? What makes up a new ticket? And my answer is anything that could be done by different skilled resources. For example, a tier 1 versus a tier 3, or that is a predecessor of something else, meaning here's a hard stop that we have to accomplish before we move on to the next thing. For example, you have to build the server before you can install the operating system. Those might be two great steps in a server replacement phase. Or the on-site piece of a server replacement, if you're doing a premise-based, might be a great phase of its own steps. It's that level of thinking you're working for. As you can see here in the columns, there's lots of different types of engineers. If you don't charge separate rates for those, You might have a separate cost basis, therefore you still want to at least calculate it this way. And what I love most about the spreadsheet is if sales/owners do this with a technician and they win the project, there's your project plan. It's ready to go. You have budgets, you have things ready to hold people accountable to what's going on. And a couple of things you can't see on this slide is I also add a contingency fee. By default, it's 10%. And if there's a bunch of question marks, puzzle pieces you don't know, I make it 20%. And if for some reason we're being very price competitive or it's a very clear small scope of work, I might go 0%. One last note, speaking of owners who don't follow the rules. When you really think about a project, I find the prices come in a little higher, but that's also because you stop losing your cert on projects. So owners ask me, what's to stop a technician from helping me scope this and give me so much time that I can't win the deal? So I have two things about that. One comes out later when we talk about how did we do and possibly even compensating project managers for this, if you have a project manager. And the other is, Mr. Owner, Mr. Salesperson, you can compete on price, but don't change our hours. Now, if you're a technical owner and you want to challenge a specific task and time, sure, do that. This is a practice you have to do because at first, technicians always quote low in my experiences. Everything goes perfect and I'm really good. They're not that good. And then as you practice this, they tend to start quoting high because like, oh yeah, you don't like it when I quote low, so I'm going to quote high. And over time, you get a data-driven approach where you quote accurate instead in best case, where you win more than you lose, and winning and losing isn't but by a few percentage points versus large swings. That's the meaty part I think most of you were expecting. But there's a lot more fun stuff in here. Because I'm still talking about we're trying to sell the project. We haven't actually won the project yet. We've done all this work to get ready for it. So during the sale, the very fact that you have this process written down and you can explain that you have this proven process to your customers, to your prospects, is a huge win in the sales department right there. You are showing them that we are the experts. We know what we're doing. This is not our first rodeo. This is the process that we know works and delivers consistently good results. Use that to your advantage, even if you're still figuring it out. Use it to your advantage. In fact, get so good at it that you can represent it graphically. This is not a project process I'm showing you. This is one that I did for us a few years ago about our general client acquisition process, where we show clients that, hey, it's a proven process and it's a graphical. And of course, my favorite part, if you're ever selling MSP services with a proven process, which you should be, is that, hey, we go through a process and then we're in a cycle and we keep doing this forever because you're going to love us. So find a way to represent this graphically as well. And then, of course, one more thing I like to show clients that we also use during the process to help win the sale is just a basic checklist. Like, hey, these are the things that we're going to do. They tend to flow in order. I'm not going to read all these to you. They'll be on the slide deck, but we will review these in other ways momentarily. We're going to use this during project management execution, but show them you have the checklist. All of these deliverables ahead of time where you anticipate their needs builds trust. You are delivering on promises you didn't know you've made yet. Build that trust. All right, get out your web browser and or your cell phone if you can. We're going to do a very quick survey. Here are the instructions for the survey. There's a phone number at the top you can text, or you can go to swiftpolling.com and enter that code 11797. I want to know what your makeup is, and Steve has hinted at this a little bit, of your project team. I want to know option one, if you have one or more dedicated full-time project resources, 40 hours a week, they're doing projects. Always small exceptions. Option two, I have a dedicated project resource, but it's not full-time, he or she. Maybe it's like, hey, this is my project guy. We don't have 40 hours a week and he does other stuff in between, but you know who it is. Option three, yeah, we have a service team. When projects come up, we just give them the tickets to handle those things. And then of course, my favorite option four, projects, pretty sure this is just a ticket. So I believe if I set my technology up right, that we're going to see these results here in a second. and then we'll move right along. Let me read through these results while we give it another 5 or 10 seconds. A dedicated team, no one has reported having that yet. A dedicated resource, but not full-time, is a bit of a majority. Service team handling projects as needed, a good 30 of you guys. And projects, pretty sure this is just a ticket. Great. So this just gives me something to talk about and to show the audience that we all do it differently. And I'm here to promise you, no matter how process-oriented I am, none of these are right or wrong. They are where you are, and that's okay. I want you to know that. And we can still move through all these things in different areas. So while these results are coming in, we're going to move on. And we're going to talk about what a project manager, whether it's part-time, full-time, or you, while you're managing those tickets, could do each day. One, it's super important that every project have a kickoff meeting. The kickoff meeting has all the stakeholders involved. That's the salesperson, the account manager, the owner, or all 3 hats in one person. The project manager, whoever's going to be managing it, maybe it's also the same person, and then project resources. Yes, if it's just you for all of those, please do not have a project meeting, but do take 5 minutes to go through this checklist. And depending on the size of the project, this could be just 2 people. It could also be a dozen, depending on the size of the project and your team. Likewise, the project could be as short as 5 minutes or as long as an hour, depending on how well scoped that project is and, of course, how complex the project is. But don't skip the meeting. You can see these here. There's a lot of review tabs. I challenge you, when I say the word review, don't just talk if you're leading this meeting. Review, ask questions, hold people accountable to holding you accountable. If I'm giving you a stupid plan, a stupid timeline, a stupid budget, tell me now. Even though we missed it in scoping, I'd rather catch it now than catch it after the project's over budget or the client's upset. What would a project manager do each day? Again, even if it's a very small person dedicated, 1 hour a day, there's something they have to do every day. So, and this is a question I get a lot. Okay, what do they do all day if I do have a project manager or a person dedicated to that for a portion of the day? 1, review the project tickets. What schedules got missed? I decided to go ahead and reference a specific status here. I like a status called needs scheduling. This just means that this ticket I have determined has all of its prerequisites met, and it is ready to be put in the schedule, however that works. Likewise, reviewing missed schedules, I use a status called scheduled less than sign. It's the same thing as scheduled past due, but sometimes we give status emails to clients with the status names. I don't like people knowing it's past due, so I just write scheduled and a little less than sign showing it's scheduled to the left of the current time. So a project manager would review tickets in these statuses on the project board or on the task list in Autotask and say, okay, we got to fix this. We got to get it back on schedule. We got to get this scheduled. Now, for those of you who have different levels of project resources, if you're borrowing from your service team, that is fine. Your dispatcher or the project teams themselves would go into the needs scheduling tickets and to grab stuff and work on it as appropriate or schedule. What works even better for shared resources is if you block off your team, like, hey, so-and-so or this service team, 2 hours a day you can have for projects, or 4 hours a week, whatever your rule is, give somebody the guidance to pull those resources. What you don't want typically is the ebb and flow of, hey, get all the projects done we have until we run out. Because what happens is project work begins to eat into managed services or hourly services work and vice versa. You got to have it balanced. And for those people who tell me, oh, projects are getting behind, that's a fact of life. You have to take care of your recurring revenue first, projects typically second, always exceptions. And in that case, for exceptions, I always tell my project managers, all you have to do is you're following the rules of scheduling is report backlog. And if the backlog is unacceptable, then that means you have to allocate more resources, whether that's hiring, carving it up differently, or just telling clients that there's a longer wait now. I'm going to keep going for time. Obviously, scheduling resources as needed, the project manager can do each day. And of course, making sure we're taking full advantage of the tools that we have available. And of course, during the day, you have those kickoff meetings we talked about. And we have another kind of meeting that's going to come up here in a second. And of course, you're in communication with your clients. Hopefully, you can make this a very a weekly cadence or less, and by email with a couple of other techniques we're going to show you here. And I always like checking on exceeded budgets, of course, to make sure we get that ticket closed, to figure out what went wrong. On a weekly basis, you're also having team meetings. I would send an email to the owners/salespeople saying, hey, this is what's going on with the projects, but keep it very short, agenda style bullet points, especially with notes after you meet about the project each week.
Hey, Alan.
Yes.
This is a question from me, not the attendees, but I hear often when I push projects on people, well, how many meetings should I have with myself? I'm the project manager. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and be the person delivering the project. And I struggle with answering that. Any thoughts on that point when it's a one-person operation handling projects?
Certainly. And I mean, the wise but answer is as many as you need. As I mentioned, I'm a fan of physically changing hats, stepping into the role. And what I'll even say here in a minute, I have this coming up, is even if it's just you and one other person, you have a temptation to go, hey, let's talk about all the projects. And that's fine. That's an effective batch use of your time. I love it. But make sure you actually change meetings. So you meet about one project. It'll look like this, actually. You meet about one project. The agenda looks like this. You conclude, you write your notes down, and then you move on to the next project. Likewise, if you really are a one-man show as far as projects go, that means no one's helping you do the projects, not even the technical work, I would still do this. It just should be very efficient and very quick. Hopefully you can do this in less than 5 minutes per week per project. Now, if you're a one-man show, you probably don't have 20 projects going on at one time. That's just an hour or two a week to keep your projects flowing right, hopefully even less.
Fantastic, thanks. I've got one more for you.
Sure.
And this comes up a lot. I'm going to assume you address it the same way I normally do. But the question is, how do you track the outcome of past projects in order to more accurately quote future projects?
Stay tuned.
All right, good.
I love it. That means I'm on target. Let's talk about the project closing, which is where we're going to do exactly that. First of all, rough duties as a project manager, even if it's just you doing everything else. Of course, reviewing all the tickets for thoroughness, one last pass. And when I say tickets for thoroughness, I also mean, do you feel that meets salesperson and client expectations? Reviewing the finance details of that project to make sure it's going to bill what was promised. Having that meeting we're going to talk about and how you learn to move forward. I call it the Post-Mortem Meeting. And sending out a survey to the client to get their feedback. I like this survey, super short, 1 to 10, how did we do? What went well? What could we do better? And then you actually have that meeting. If it's with yourself, still have the meeting, but make it short. Where you review, okay, you review all this with your team or with yourself. And I think, yes, you could go back and do data, but chances are anything you have in the past wasn't structured in a way that you're properly recording data per type of task. If it is, great, you can do that. Add that to your list. But as is, take them one project at a time. You just completed a project, everything looks great, you have a meeting, where were you over budget, where were you under budget, and why? And then make decisions about modifying your written SOP, your project template, your Excel SOW template, whatever that is. Make that decision while the project is fresh in your mind of what could be better. Every now and then the answer is stuff happens. Ask yourself, is stuff likely to happen again, or is this an exception? If everything's an exception, you're probably wrong, but there will always be a few exceptions. I hope that helped answer that part of your question, Steve.
It certainly did, thank you.
Again, Post-Mortem, do it live. I also recommend the same thing for any service tickets that go off the rails. Once you get it resolved, have a meeting. How do we prevent this? So my conjecture is that if we do these things and we get results, therefore the owner aspect of this is willing to not skip steps because they want the results and they see that if I put information in the black box, I get good information out. Because things look like this now. Well, now you're making an informed agreement about how much this project costs and what's the deliverables. You have all the pieces. Now you get your team together and you make a plan and how we're going to get to work. And now your folks are working and there's far less questions coming up about how they're going to be working. You start actually knowing where you're at in the project, checking off all the to-dos, hitting your targets, everybody's happy. Obviously, you still have an ebb and flow in your calendar, but it's no longer filling up beyond capacity as you repeat the process and you're actually closing projects. I can tell you time and time again, when I'm called in to help specifically on projects, the first thing I see is, I'll give you real numbers, 60 to 100 open projects with an average MSP size of 20 folks. There is no way anybody could possibly manage that many projects of that size. So it comes down to how I'm going to recommend you get started. One, pick your project team lead. I do recommend for whoever this is, it could change project to project. I think you're better off starting with one person. Maybe it's you as the owner, maybe it's you as the salesperson, maybe it's your most tech person, maybe it's your dispatcher. Look for who could follow these types of steps and deliver repeatable results. Just worry about this for one project. And I can tell you that typically what ends up happening is it's really hard to convince the owner to start this at the sales cycle. So pick a project that either has already started or is off the rails and you need to rein it in. To rein it in, figure out what scope is left, what tasks are left, update your project templates or a spreadsheet, whatever it is you're using. Start from where you're at. Do not berate progress no matter how slow. Hope that made sense. I know it was very high level and very fast. Maybe you think it's a bit idealistic, but what my hope for you is that there were actionable pieces in here where you can begin, because beginning is the hardest part. I know even this morning I had to get some tickets done for clients. I was like, oh, tickets. How do I begin? There's so much to do. I have this presentation today. But as soon as I put that first ticket in progress and get started and get focused, I was like, 30 minutes, done with 3 tickets. It was great. So getting started is the hardest part. Please do that. I certainly have time for questions if Steve allows. A couple of quick resources while he tells me if there's any last minute questions. On our website, there is some free stuff out there. There's also a membership site for a fee, but there's a free trial if you want to try that. And if you're interested specifically in projects, you can click on the category projects and get there. My direct contact info is there as well. I am always glad to help, especially during these times. If you just want to chat, if you just want to cry, if you just want to give virtual hugs, that's fine. Contact me. And if you happen to be interested in IT documentation, there is a peer group out there at Facebook called IT-Doug, IT Documentation Users Group. Peers helping peers with IT documentation. My definition of documentation, by the way, is not just client assets, but it's SOPs, standard operating procedures or processes. And another way to define that is it's the decisions we've made. So if we've decided to work projects that way, that becomes an SOP in your documentation. Steve, thank you so much for making MSP-Ignite a reality and inviting me to participate with these great folks. What I love about speaking to this audience over all the rest is there's a certain maturity level at people who are looking at peer groups and the services you provide. And that's what I appreciate because that's where we can get the most progress out of.
Great,
Thanks,
Alan.
Steve.
Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes for some Q&A, and I wanted to talk to you about the fact that you did this without talking about any of the tools that many people use to manage their lives, right? The PSAs or even going to Microsoft Project. And I've always found that what tends to happen in our industry is that we're very tool focused. So when we realize we need to do a better job with projects, we decide to turn to our PSA or purchase another project tool and learn it while we work on our ability to actually manage a project, and quickly point back to the tool and say that tool's a bear to work with, or the more explicit it sucks. And therefore, I can't use it to run projects and I'm back to square one. Is that the reason you do this generically when you start talking projects?
Absolutely, because I feel firmly that it's process first. Maybe I'm a little older school, but even back in the noughties, the 2000s when I was running my business, I started every process on paper first, literally paper. And then we followed it based on verbal directions. And then as it was working, I would digitize it. Now these days, tools like IT Glue, Passportal, great for documentation, SharePoint, OneNote, OneDrive. Yeah, I write it digitally first, but it's got to work in theory on paper before you worry about tools. Yes, there will be some minor adjustments to the process when you go to the tool, but if you start going with a tools first approach, you frequently miss the why am I doing this versus just trying to make the tool work. And being in the field we're in, we love tools. I consider tools the carrot or the stick of process. I mean, if it's a cool enough tool, I can get you guys to do it, but you got to have the process behind it first.
So someone actually asked, and while we try not to endorse one product over another, someone asked, hey, what's Alan's favorite projects tool? So you want to take, I know how I would answer this. and if you want me to go first, I will, to help set it up.
I'm glad to go first on this one.
Go ahead.
This is a classic consulting or coach answer, which is the tool you use is the best tool.
Yeah, we think alike on that one. And that's if you're using an integrated solution, why not use the projects? And what I have found, at least in my experience, is at least the big two PSAs we all know of.
Yes.
Both of their project tools are equally as good and equally as difficult as anything else out there and each other. And that includes going to, Microsoft projects. They actually stack up fairly well considering all the integration you get back to other things in your business.
Yeah, and what third-party tools add, they lose on the integration side. We're probably about 75% managed clients and 25% auto task. And we move everybody toward using the project system they have. Yep. And the benefits of using the one in your PSA is the fact that the people who are working on the projects already know how. There might be an extra screen to look at. There might be an extra view to change. Well, that information is there, time is recorded, billing is all set up right. It's all built in, which is the whole point of a PSA.
Yep, it is. I'm going to do these really quick. We're really right at the top of the hour, but just real quick. Is there a standalone projects tool that you do prefer if someone is looking standalone?
I do not have a preference. I've seen many tools used successfully for that company and many of the same tools hated by another company. So no.
And given the makeup of our audience by your survey, which was really cool, by the way, do you think there's value in any of the people on this call getting some project management training?
Yes.
I can tell you. I do too, but can you give me a 15-second qualifier on that?
The way I've used project management training in the past, which by the way, first of all, is seldom, is I've had a few folks when I was a service manager who were looking to move that way in their IT career. And they were like, hey, what studying should I do? And we came up with a study path for them on that way on their own time. So far, I have not had reason to recommend that as a professional company sponsor development path. And part of it is because just following a project process like this, it's honestly, it's not rocket science. It's not even news. It's just laid out for you to comply with this first brings you a long way.
Yep. Fantastic. Great job. Real quick, before I wrap this up, we're obviously all working from home a lot. We're all looking for things to do with the time we would have spent on planes going to big events and whatnot. And the entire vendor community is moving us into an awful lot of webinars. And we're not the only ones in that. A lot of people are. But we do have every week, MSP-Ignite has been hosting a town hall discussion. Alan's been on a good portion of those as well. Beth from Rocket Cyber has as well. And it's really just meant for hey, who wants to talk about what's going on? The struggles with managing their workforce, the struggles with managing their families while they try and work at home, the struggles with PPP loan. So if you're interested in our town hall meetings, that is not listed here on this form. Just shoot us an email, reply to any of the emails you have from MSP-Ignite, and we'll get you the invite to the one that we're doing tomorrow or the one next week. And then on Friday, I'm really pleased about working with Unitrends MSP on this, but sales should not be forgotten. And while you may not feel comfortable selling yet, you will be out there selling pretty soon. And this is just a great forum we put together, 2.5 hours. Certainly feel free to jump on and off it if you like, because it will be recorded and shared. But we're going to talk to you about developing a marketing plan now so that you're successful in the future. With that said, thank you all for staying on as long as you did. We had a very nice audience for this one. Really appreciate it. Hope the information you received today was actionable and helpful. For those not already participating in one of our peer groups, please reach out to us. Now's the best time to jump in and get some value. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Billy, for your time and expertise. And everyone, please have a great day.